A supply chain crisis is threatening to derail the world's economic and cultural.
Exacerbated pre-existing supply chain issues while also creating new ones.
The global supply chain is being stretched to breaking point.
Household staples like diapers, razors, and toothbrushes, the supply chain crisis is taking a toll.
Markets are again experiencing supply shortages of such basic goods.
The supply is not meeting the demand. So we talk about the supply.
My question to you is, where are we now and where are we headed?
This is Radical Reinvention, a show by 0100 about reimagining the world's supply chains. I'm Kevin O'Mara. I've spent 30 years working in supply chains, and in that time I've learned a lot about how we move stuff and the people who move that stuff around the planet. I've also learned that supply chains don't always move with the planet or people in mind. That's why we're pushing the biggest companies in the world towards 0% carbon, 100% digitized supply chains. This means a world where people's needs are met, but the planet is preserved. To do that, we're working together with the world's most innovative supply chain pioneers and industry experts to tackle some of the biggest challenges facing the planet today. And we're inviting all of you along for the ride. Join us as we work to create a more sustainable and responsible supply chain, one radical reinvention at a time. Today's episode is our last of 2022 and also marks the end of 0100's first year as a company. And with supply chain still top of mind for companies, households, and newsrooms around the world, we thought this was a great time to dig in a bit on the recent impact supply chain has had and will continue to have on the world. So, for this episode, we're going to reflect on the year's ending, look ahead to the year that's to come, and in true 0100 fashion, imagine what might be possible a little further down the road if things go according to plan. Helping us to do that today is a special guest, Marc Engel. Marc is the former Chief Supply Chain Officer over at Unilever and is currently a 0100 board member, the chair of Unilabs and the vice chair of the board at Maersk. Marc and I will be joined by Deborah and Mike Silverman, two of our senior researchers here at 0100. Let's jump in. We're sitting here, and I've got my good friend Marc Engel, who has guided us from the very beginning here at 0100, and a good friend for many, many years, as well as a couple of my colleagues, Deborah and Michael Silverman. Marc, do you want to say a quick hello first before we get started?
Yeah, hello everyone. It's great to be here and do this in person.
We are doing it in person, which is a rare treat. Too many of these podcasts are all virtual, so this is a no Zoom meeting for me and Marc, which is great. But Deborah and Michael, say a quick hello from each of you guys.
Thrilled to be here, Kevin. Excited to look at the year behind us and look forward. Always fun to do some predictions to see where the world is headed. So thanks for having us.
Thank you, Deborah. Michael, how about you?
Hey, Kevin. Yeah, thrilled to be here and excited for our convo today.
So, Marc, I will let you go first. Any stories of the year that stood out for you around supply chain in this crazy year 2022?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. I think there are many, but I would have to start with a one that has been pretty bad. It's, of course, about the war in Ukraine. And Unilever, we have an operation in Ukraine. There are about 150 very brave people that have kept the business running. And we've had real impact. We've had our factory near Kiev taken by the Russians. We've had both of our warehouses blown up. So all of it has been lost. We've been able to put families of our workers in Poland, create jobs for them. We've been able to relocate people to safer zones. But the reason why I say that is very often we talk about freight costs or COVID or whatever. But, in my last 3 months at Unilever, when I was managing the Russia-Ukraine crisis, then it all of a sudden comes very, very close. When you're sitting even on the other end of the phone with the people who are there, seeing pictures of the factory, seeing pictures of our distribution centers, that's not such a good memory, but a very, very impactful and close memory of what has made 2022.
Yeah, it's a grim story. And one of the things about supply chain that is a reality is supply chain is the plant, it is the DC, it is the lane, it is the flow of food. So when something like Ukraine comes along, it's a really heavy-duty reminder of supply chain. But that's a bad story. Any good stories that stood out for you in the year?
Well, humankind and supply chain leaders in particular never cease to amaze me in terms of how resilient things are. And it's not just around COVID, but then around all the inflation. And we move from a surplus of workers and we're worried about the future of work because there is too many people and not enough jobs, to a situation where there are not enough people and there are not enough truck drivers and we can't find the people to run hospitals and restaurants and hotels, etc. And half a year later, we're back again where we were. And it is just unbelievable how resilient and how agile the community has been to keep the world running. If there's ever been a year where supply chain people can really be proud of what they have achieved, I think it's in this year, because it's been coming from all directions. We thought we were getting rid of COVID slowly. You get a war, you get massive inflation, and still we keep things running. And in day-to-day life, you notice very little of it.
It's been inspiring, honestly, given the heaviness of the bad moments, including the Ukraine war. Resilience, it's a problem-solving mentality. And that's what I love about supply chain is people do solve the problem. Everybody shows up and expects to figure it out and get themselves back in business the next morning. So it has been a time. Every day in the news, supply chain, supply chain, supply chain.
Yeah.
But I do think that's kind of the good news. The supply chain is showing its colors. I'm going to go to you two guys. Deborah, do you want to give a story or two that you think of as good, bad, or mixed?
I would love to, Kevin. Thank you. First story builds on this idea of future of work and really how our teams show up for us. We've just finished some research called Never Waste a Crisis, where we heard from supply chain leaders about how they made it through the pandemic. One of the stories I heard was from a factory manager who said, look, normally process improvements or work to assets, the capital equipment on our line, this happens from international experts flown in to come and bring their expertise. But during COVID, of course, folks couldn't fly. So what that means is the folks in the factory got a chance to really step up, show what they know, do the work themselves, get some assistance over video, but really shows us what's possible when our teams are able to work outside of their job descriptions. So this one I really like is a story for a reminder of the resilience of our teams, to Marc's earlier point.
One thing, Marc, before I go back to you, Deborah, I know you had a couple other you wanted to mention. You talked about abnormalization when we were chatting earlier. And Deborah's talked about people just kind of bouncing around and doing things in this world that's become so basically jumpy. That phrase sticks out, and maybe that's your word of the year. We'll come back to that. But what does it mean to you with respect to what Deborah's talking about with people stepping out of their jobs and doing different things?
The definition of normal is basically what you used to or seen before. And so that when I hear Deborah talking, for me, it's all about sort of unlearning the past, because you judge things by your experience. And what you're seeing more and more is that anything that we've experienced in the last 50 years is not really relevant in this world. And that, I think, is embodying abnormalization, because what is normal and abnormal, you can't judge that by your own sort of experience standards anymore. And so the agility in learning and the adaptability and making sure that you're stepping out of one role and stepping in another role because that role didn't exist yesterday because it wasn't relevant.
Deb, any thoughts about how this feels to the person in the job, whether senior or entry level?
Absolutely. Look, the joy of being in supply chain is that we don't always know what's going to happen. Regardless of how much work we put into trying to make a predictable space for us, supply chains are alive. And so the fun of being a supply chain professional is being able to put our smarts to work to try to solve all these problems. And so when we don't give automatable, repeatable jobs to computers or machines and ask humans to do them, guess what? They don't like their job quite as much. But when we give them a chance to really solve some problems, I think that's when they really thrive, of course. I heard this year from the CEO of a company called Green Mining based in Brazil in some of our research around urban mining. They've got several patents for their work that may surprise folks. They're actually in the informal waste picking industry and reverse logistics. They use machine vision and a series of digital meets human process checks in order to go and collect value, often empty bottles, and allow them to be reused as bottles, really speaking into a circular business model, and then also instantly, digitally paying these pickers. So they're taking an industry that I believe will be the foundation of the future of how we're going to be able to retain value and continue working to decouple our revenue growth from the resources that we need And they're inspiring us to look at any process then and say, wow, we could actually digitize this, even if there's no digitization that jumps out at us as the first space to go to. So this idea of challenging what we think is normal, and also, again, putting people to work, trusting them to make really important decisions and gut decisions in the moment.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And with so many angles of sort of digitizing the non-digital, because I think this is, many businesses are struggling to say, well, everybody's talking about digitization. How do I do that? And here you have a business that you could say is all about people and people on the street. And so digitizing the undigital, I think that's what I was thinking about. And I was thinking, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's a hot one. Michael, I'm going to come to you finally. I'm sorry for making you wait, but I got kind of carried away with these guys. What are your stories of the year, Michael?
For me, the interesting story of the past year is really the plateau of big tech, seeing that there's a limit to the billions of people who will sign up for Facebook or watch an ad on Instagram or YouTube. We kind of knew this day would come, but seeing these rockets plateau in the stratosphere has been really surprising for me. And we see TikTok as a breakaway star and now a formidable challenger. Seeing these channels evolve and then thinking, how is that going to connect back to supply chain to make our supply chains more responsive to what customers are responding to, how they're talking about things? How can our supply chains become more agile and less wasteful? I think are the exciting things I'm looking back at this past year.
It goes back to abnormalization, and it's big tech. Amazon. I spent 3 years at Amazon just before starting 0100. Abnormalization is devastating to an algorithm-driven forecasting system. And in the case of Amazon and anybody else who's accustomed to patterns that make sense, helping you anticipate the patterns that are coming, you're completely blown up. It's very AI heavy, and I love AI as a solve for a lot of different things, but it really depends on the data set. And once the data set becomes rogue, everything kind of blows up. So I think the plateau of big tech, and maybe it's a plateau, not a peak and trough situation. We'll see. I have a lot of faith in big tech coming back personally, but it has to get over this kind of phase of the limits of the early tool sets are being shown by the elimination of normalcy in supply chain. So it's a good call out, Michael. I have a negative story I'm dying to throw out there, but I don't want to preempt it. You got any negative stories that stood out for you?
I have one, and that is the complete and utter failure of COP27.
Oh, you stole mine. You Go ahead.
No, I mean,
I want to hear where you're going. I bet these guys feel the same.
The thing that is just mind-boggling for me is that obviously we've all realized that climate change is here, and most companies have made commitments to net zero. And so the next task is not to convince people to get there, but how do we get there? We now need to get shit done. It is for me like your kitchen is on fire, but we are discussing the color of the curtains rather than calling the fire brigade. And the biggest issue with getting things done is the lack of transparency and harmonization of regulation. And there's a lot of stupidity in regulation. And the fact that we just cannot get the alignment on between countries because there's so many political agendas, et cetera, et cetera. So really, for me, it's just mind-boggling. And I have an example that I feel very passionate about. It's about the capture of carbon. Now, the job at hand today for everybody is to make sure that the carbon doesn't get into the sky, right? But at the moment, we're burning a lot of fossil fuels in big chimneys. You see a couple of around you here in London. And collecting carbon dioxide in a chimney is very economic, because there is about 20% of carbon dioxide in a chimney. And so collecting it costs about $200 a ton. And that means that carbon can be reused. You can make fuel of it. You can make fertilizer of it. You can do whatever you want with it. You can store it. But that carbon is not biogenetic carbon. It is recycled carbon. It's black carbon. It's not green carbon. And therefore, whatever you make of it, you can't make green fuel, green plastic, green whatever. Do you put your carbon collector 200 yards from that chimney, and by the time it gets into the sky, and by the time the concentration gets down to 1%, it's called biogenic carbon. And so if you collect it there, it's then green carbon. It's the same carbon that just came out of the chimney. But unfortunately, the economics of carbon capturing, where the 1% concentration is 2,000 euros a ton, by which time you can't economically create anything from it because basically the price differential is too big. You have to look at governments because that's regulation. Because Companies want to do stuff. And at the end of the day, the world will be a better place if we start taking carbon out of these chimneys. So take the 1,000 chimneys in Europe or the world or whatever and start collecting carbon. But the regulations don't allow it. And as long as we don't fix that, you will struggle to get things done, because in a high inflation environment, people just don't have the financial space to create fuels that are 10 times the price of black fuels or fossil fuels. And this is just mind-boggling that we cannot sort this out.
Yeah, it's a root fail in the way business and government interact. In fact, I ran into this with a collection of big footwear and apparel brands this year who I've worked with for a long time on trying to coalesce fair labor standards. And they've had a fantastic success actually coming together on common assessment methods. But it requires being very careful about not doing anti-competitive collaboration on things that you're prohibited by law from doing. And you really have to work overtime to get yourself past some of these reg limitations. But this brings it back to business. And I think that one of the concerns is, how do you as a group of businesses in an industry come together and agree upon either a standard for measurement or a standard for behavior, or solving the problem that you just described around carbon capture in a way where you're just kind of cracking through a weird catch-22 in the rules? Anyhow, that's a little depressing, but that was my negative story, was COP27. I think the fail is we're past the point of awareness, about 3 years past the point of awareness, and still not have really started the point of action. So, Michael, I got to come back to you again. What is your other favorite story of the year?
For sure. This is a quick one, too. I keep coming back to this image that was on the cover of The Economist. It had ESG letters, and there was scissors cutting the E off of the SG. And it was really talking about the focusing on the E in ESG, and really how we need to focus on reducing emissions, fighting climate change as the real measurable thing to move forward here. And not that those other initiatives aren't important, but I just thought about that focus. There's been so much pushback on ESG investments this past year as well, too. So I think this focusing on emissions, decarbonization, et cetera, where we can set targets, measure our progress forward, has been something that's really stuck with me from 22.
It occurs to me that ESG is basically too big a tent. And as BlackRock and others kind of fall under the weight of what is really an increasingly dubious collection of goals, you have to pick the things you're going to bet on. Deborah, I'll give you a sec to jump in on this because Michael's got a real point. I know you've just completed some very detailed research, which I'm really excited about. Can you just summarize that real quickly and speak to the pulling the E out of ESG and what that means to us in supply chain?
Definitely. Really excited about this piece of analysis we've just completed. We're going to publish it soon. Mark, it gets back to your earlier point that it's time to get going. It's time to actually do something. But the challenge in supply chain, or really any other field, is if we don't really truly understand what it is we're trying to do in numbers, it's very difficult for us to take action. And we've seen the overall annual greenhouse gas emission, 50 to 52 billion tons a year-ish. We've seen that split up in different ways, sometimes by societal needs like comms or housing, sometimes a little bit around transportation, but it's difficult for us to align that to the way that supply chains operate. So our analysis has taken that 51 billion tons and aligned it to the 0-100 loop functions to say specifically, if you're in sourcing, what's the collective goal for us to go after, and give you enough information to translate it for your own supply chain depending on the materials that you rely heavily on. And what we're able to do then is to say, look, based on what's causing these emissions, what are existing technologies that already are out there that we can then turn to existing partners we may already pay for, but ask them to help us look at the data in a slightly different way. 75%-ish of emissions now is from energy, whether it's energy for lights or energy for vehicles. And we have energy management solutions that we've been using for years in our facilities. But I think that those can even be turned up higher. We can learn even more. We can share that with our suppliers. It's often very, very difficult for us to see past tier 2. Our research shows it's 6 or 7%. A recent McKinsey study shows it's 5% of supply chains can see past their second tier. So then the option becomes, do we really actually need to see it? Or can we gather everyone together to take action? And if we can test in our own tier 1 partnerships, then we can share that further up the supply chain and ultimately just take the action that we need to take to start transitioning to renewables, becoming more efficient energy, and so forth. So we're looking at 2 categories, tech for today that already exists, well-established players, and then also breakthroughs for tomorrow.
Yeah, I appreciate that sort of quick summary, Deborah, because it is an action orientation and it's about specifically the E in ESG, and it's action-oriented. So for all the closing out segment 1 here about stories of the year, the good, the bad, and the ugly, I see a path forward, which is the good is the supply chain is actually quickly solving these problems and resilient and attacking this stuff, and we're getting a far better focus on what there is. So I want to talk about the word of the year. And according to the New York Times, goblin mode is the word of the year. It's a slang term referring to a type of behavior which is unapologetically self-indulgent, lazy, slovenly, or greedy, typically in a way that rejects social norms or expectations. Ouch. Apparently that's Oxford's 2022 word of the year. I do not like that, and yet it is irresistibly funny and cool. Do you guys have a word of the year? I'll throw it open. Anybody who wants to jump first.
Deborah, you go first. Come on.
All right, deal. If you have spent any time with me at all, this one is also not going to be a surprise. I have a topic even more favorite to me than the circular economy, which is also my supply chain word of the year, which is inventory. Yay. The misunderstood hero of supply chains everywhere. Everything is inventory. Inventory has caused joy and pain this year and will continue to be a strategic challenge this next year as leaders decide how they want to use this working capital, especially as we get squeezed financially. So the decision of where, when, how much, how to forward position, where to put that inventory, how to switch to something like an online channel, which helps relieve some of that pressure. I find inventory super fascinating, and unfortunately, it's usually picked on. So I'm the advocate. Treat your inventory better. It'll treat you better back.
Great word choice, Deborah. Certainly all your supply chain friends get that one. Michael, what's your word of the year?
So I chose a word of the year that kind of did go goblin mode this year, which is blockchain. I really feel like with the crypto winter, NFT thefts and scams, the implosion of FTX, it's just like, how can we not talk about it? And then bring it back to supply chain. I think there's a few things of really, one, there's the green impact of the Ethereum merge, really making that less of an energy hog process is really exciting. And then I think we've seen applications of blockchain within the supply chain, advancing our ability for transparency, especially across global supply chains, multiple suppliers and things like that. So I'm hopeful that we're past our goblin mode time through the noise of it and can use the technology to do more good.
Well, that's a good one, Michael. Blockchain certainly feels like something we should be looking sideways at, but I'm not prepared to give up on it just yet. However, I do have a word of the year myself, and my word, it was triggered a little bit by that article you sent me yesterday from Bain about CFOs embracing the madness as an opportunity. And the word is chaos monkey. I learned this word, apparently it comes from Netflix, but I learned it from the chief operating officer of Inditex. He and I were sitting together on a bus recently, and he described to me how the chaos monkey technique they had learned at Netflix about being system tolerant. No shutdowns. The chaos monkey at Netflix apparently is they would periodically just shut down a server and not tell anybody. And it would be up to the team to figure out how to turn it back on before somebody lost their movie. And they swapped it to a higher level, which they called chaos gorilla, which involves shutting down everything and seeing how quickly we could stand everything back up. Now, really, that's no different from a fire drill. But when Carlos Crespo, the COO of Inditex, was telling me the story, they adopted this logic and Inditex to try to figure out how to put themselves in a comparably risk-tolerant situation. What I love about the concept is you're taking something that you know is going to be a problem, and you're not just preparing for it. You're getting good at it. You're basically learning to like it. And if you are, as in Netflix case, good at responding to the chaos monkey, guess what? Netflix becomes this reliable system we all fall back on. And I think what's exciting is chaos monkey's a friendly way to think of all this. It's like, yeah, they're messing with things, but it doesn't mean life has to stop. It just means you have to live with it. In fact, lean into it. Take advantage of it. So chaos monkey, that was my word of the year for 2022. Let me take us to segment 2. What would you start, stop, and continue in supply chain? Mark, you prepared to jump on this one?
Yeah, look, I think we have to stop saying that it's a perfect storm because every year is a perfect storm. So, it is abnormalization. And I think we just need to stop moaning about it and start thriving in it. And you see a lot of people and a lot of companies are starting to do that. So everything you learned about sourcing for cost and long supply chains and all this kind of stuff, it is all about agility. It's all about not classing something as normal or abnormal, which is a judgment, but it's where's the opportunity? To start is I really just continue on that carbon capture point is that rather than calling something green or gray or yellow or blue or pink or purple carbon, we need to go to circular carbon. When you're saying plastic is all made from oil, but when you recycle it, you reduce the need for more oil coming out of the ground for plastic. So if you have a 50% recycling, you get to a 50% circular plastic. It's the same with carbon. We need to start thinking about circular carbon rather than blue, black, orange, and yellow. Because even if the first cycle from carbon comes from oil, and Deborah has just said 75% of the footprint comes from energy, so read oil. If you can basically recapture that, turn it into a fuel again, and then recapture it again, because you can recapture it endlessly. Every time you burn it, you can recapture it. And so we need to think about carbon dioxide as a circular good, just as we're looking at plastic and aluminium and steel and all this kind of stuff. And I think when we have that thinking, it allows you to reshape the regulation. It allows you to take real action with technologies that exist today that you can really change the world, lower the energy demand because you're creating fuels from circular carbon.
You're getting a lot of nodding heads from your fellow panelists here. Deborah and Michael are all gung-ho on. Deborah, let's start with you and then we'll go to Michael.
Great. Yeah, just in reaction to Mark really fast, one of the ideas that's been swirling in our team recently, and we're going to start publishing a little bit on this in that report I just mentioned, is as a complement to a low or zero carbon operation, what if we imagined a carbon full operation? To your point, Mark, what if we started treating carbon as the resource that it is? Tough for us to do with stopwatches and clipboards because we actually can't see it, but it's there. And we've managed to do it for energy, so we can definitely do it for carbon. But this is a really exciting place of material innovation, of using carbon either from industrial sources like you explained, which is far more efficient, or direct air capture to be able to put it back in and make really robust material. So really excited about seeing that space, treating carbon like a friend, not a foe. Properly focused carbon can help us all. All right, stop, start, continue here. Kevin, all in the same theme. Stop. We need to think of one bad habit that your team has with data and resolve to change the culture around that this year. It could be around master data. It could be around the belief that we need to be selling data. Instead, start treating data like the table stakes that they are for doing business. We learned this during COVID. It was impossible to function without sharing some level of data. And now it's time to apply this to carbon, responsible supply chains, or just simply optimizing for margin that we're all going to have to do in these next couple of years. Which means continue to seek opportunities for collective action. This is something that we hear a lot across the 0100 community. How can companies work together to make a difference? And big news this last year, we saw Project Gigaton from Walmart and Schneider Electric, all about data sharing and also collective action for transitioning to renewable energy. And just this week saw a collective solar purchase from provider Enel in North America, from McDonald's and others. So I think this is going to be a data play. I think the relationship that we have with data needs to start to transition. Lots to talk about here at Unpack. I think it really relates to the way that we were taught around data with social media and sharing data around individuals. But at some point, we're going to have to let these supply chains run on their own, which means they need to be able to exchange data on their own without guardianship, which brings into the importance of G in ESG, which I think is the least spoken about or appreciated of the elements, because without this data governance, we're really going to be in a tough place. So that's my stop, start, continue. I think it's a data play. I think it's important to develop some data literacy among our teams. Lots of folks already know a lot in the space, and so putting them all together to solve some hard problems is a great place to start.
Couldn't agree more, Deborah. I've heard that data is the new oil thing. It's a cliche, but there's something to it. And the more we understand it, the more I think that's valid. Michael, how about you start, stop, continue?
For sure. So first, I'm going to echo Deborah. My stop was to stop thinking competitively. Moving from competitive to cooperative, I think, is how we really start unlocking stuff. That's what our 0100 community is all about. Non-competitive discourse, knowledge sharing. We have so much work to do and things that we need to figure out. And we're going to move faster together. So that's something that I'm really excited for in 23. Continue, I feel like we're seeing a lot of advances in automation that I'm really excited about, some of which customers are even seeing, like miso robots making French fries in White Castles and automated Blank Street coffee machines and stores, which some people don't like, but I think it's all very exciting as we move forward into the future. And for the start, I think there's something interesting about customers willing to accept less convenient experiences in the name of sustainability. I'm doing research right now on these triple win case studies that are good for the planet, for shareholders, and for customers. And I think what's really interesting is when customers are willing to make a sacrifice or willing to accept something a little less convenient. Will they accept, delayed shipping from Amazon? Will they take the extra steps to put a Blue Land soap tablet in and add their own water rather than buy another liquid soap? This is really cool because it can inform how supply chains can develop better products for the environment, working with marketing to successfully market them and sell them to customers, even though these challenges to our normal standards of convenience.
Yeah, Michael, I got to say, I love that. I think the start and the stop, they go together, right? Stop saying customers won't buy into this stuff. We keep talking ourselves into this. I've had this conversation again and again and again with people all over the place too. Not just senior supply chain folks, but very sort of young, tech-savvy, marketing, social-friendly folks. I just don't believe it. And I certainly hope it's not true. What I like to say, I wish I didn't have to say, but what I believe is if people really don't care upon being given the right information, we might as well just quit because we're toast. So I say stop that. And what goes with it is start trying to provide transaction-specific information, item, location, date-specific information of the, I'd like to say carbon, but the sustainability impacts of what you're doing. I believe people will begin to buy accordingly. I want to say one thing I didn't hear anything about yet, but I think is critical. We have to continue to move toward the cloud. Microservices architecture is a radically different way of actually running these systems. I know this only because of 3 years at Amazon. The entire thing is one giant, endless string of apps built in the cloud. It's fast. It's very quick to fix once it's broken. It's very quick to extend once a problem is out there. And everybody I know is beginning to work on it, but I say continue. I think it's probably a 10-year quest to get off of the old architectures on to this more flexible. Which gets me to our final segment, Magic Wand. If you had a magic wand, what would you change right now?
There are many things that I would like to change. I think, can I give more than one? Or
You can give as many as you want,
cut
man.
them out.
You're on the board. You can do whatever you want.
The first thing is I think I would really like that we all commit to supply chains where we pay people properly and where everybody goes home with a living wage. We're close to Christmas in this part of the world. But I think you have to really ask yourself, if the definition of poverty is $2 a day, how many people in the supply chain do you still have in your supply chain that are on less than $2 a day? So that's one. The other one is, because I'm the chair of Unilabs, which is a medical diagnostics company. And there's this an astonishing fact that 3% of all the healthcare costs in the world is diagnostics and 97% is treatment. And it is proven that if you would triple the diagnostics cost, that you could cut 3/4 of the treatment cost just by making sure people having access to proper diagnostics so that you get it before people get really ill. And that can be any kind of illness. And so access to medical diagnostics for everyone, I think, is a very, very big theme that at the moment is very close to my heart because of the work that I do.
That's a genius one. I hadn't thought of that. How about you guys? Magic Wand? Michael, I'll come to you first, and Deborah, then I'll let you wrap up Magic Wand.
I've just been really inspired by what we've been seeing in the news of science recently. We've seen the nuclear fusion breakthrough as a potential clean source of energy. And we've seen 2 entirely new alien minerals from a meteorite discovered in Somalia. I feel like science fiction is happening right now. So my magic wand would be, I just want to fast forward 10 years to where we get to see what this stuff does for us. I'm totally geeking out right now over what science is unlocking, but it's really cool to think that the things that we need to solve are things that we have yet to discover, but they're close. So I think that those things unlocking how we can live better on this planet are just really exciting to me.
Cool one, Michael. Love the weird science angle. Deborah, how about you?
All right, magic wand moment for me. Surprising no one, mine is going to be in the theme of circularity, one of my most favorite topics. And circularity is not really about recycling. It's actually about allowing an item to remain as itself for as long as possible. So I'd have large-scale repair and remanufacturing, perhaps not super sexy, but interesting to me. I recently had the chance to speak with Rob Lawson-Shanks, the CEO of a company called Molg, M-O-L-G. They do exactly this. They use robotics, smart product design, machine vision for quality, really clever data structures, and they're automating the big loop of the circular economy. They're looking at servers, they're looking at PCs, they're working with Black & Decker, they can re-certify batteries for reuse. Really exciting space, time and cost competitive. So I feel like we're right on the cusp of being able to really keep our things lasting longer. And I imagine a world where this can continue for jeans and blenders and things around our homes. It can translate into consumables like Mike mentioned earlier, refillable soaps. I think all of this is going to happen. If we get really crazy, think 2050 science fiction, combine this with using carbon from the air, we've got ourselves a Star Trek replicator going on. So I'm really excited about the future state.
I love that one. I love the way we keep getting farther and farther out. If I could wave a magic wand, the first thing I would do actually is make it obvious to everybody every time they buy something what their carbon footprint is. And like I said, item, location, and date specific, because it depends every single time. And all this generic brand level labeling, we get a little sticker on the package that says I'm Forestry Stewardship Council approved. People don't buy it. They might buy this, I don't know. But if I wave my magic wand and had that there, I would begin to see whether humankind is prepared to save itself. And I have to believe that we can. So listen, guys, this has been great. We've only got a couple minutes left, and I wanted to thank you all. Michael, Deborah for dialing in both, and Marc for hosting me in person in his beautiful flat here in London. I'm really glad we got to do this in person. And that's a wrap for 2022. Thanks, everybody. All right, friends, there you have it. That's it for Radical Reinvention Episode 5. Thank you to Marc Engel, 0100 board member, chair of the board at Unilabs, and vice chair of the board at Maersk for joining us today. And to my colleagues Deborah and Mike Silverman for sharing their insights with us. You can find the links referenced throughout this episode in the show notes. 0100 community members can check out all of our full interviews online at 0100.com. See you next time.
This episode of Radical Reinvention was produced by Kevin O'Mara, Mike Silverman, Catherine Perry, Brian Egan, Diane Hope, Nick Heineman, and me, Victoria Marin. Deborah Dole and Mike Silverman contributed research insights for the episode, and Ko Takasugi Chernovin is our sound engineer and also composed our theme music. To find out more about 0100 and to check out our content library, go to 0100.com. If you're interested in joining our community of contributors, send us a note at hello@0100.com.